On March 4th, 2023, at 6:23 in the morning, Wade Mercer descended into darkness 1,140 feet below the Pacific Ocean, 71 miles southwest of San Diego, and discovered something that should not exist. The sonar had detected it 3 hours earlier, a massive structure on the seafloor that registered as dense mineral composition, possibly geological. But when Wade's helmet lights cut through the black water at depth, what he saw was not rock. It was bone. A human skeleton, 47 feet long from skull to heel, lying in a fetal position with massive iron chains binding its wrists to its ankles. The skeleton had perfect human proportions, flawless anatomical structure, just scaled up 8 times larger than any person who had ever lived. But here is what made Wade's blood run cold in the 37-degree water. The chains were intact. 3 tons of hand-forged iron per chain, showing almost no corrosion despite what had to be centuries underwater. At 1,140 feet, nitrogen narcosis should have made complex thought nearly impossible. Yet Wade was measuring, photographing, documenting with technical precision that violated everything known about diving psychology at that depth. Wade Mercer was 39 years old, a technical diving instructor based in San Diego, with 14 years of experience and over 600 logged dives. He had served in the Navy as a salvage diver for 8 years before going civilian in 2015. His ex-wife Jenny lived in Phoenix with their 7-year-old daughter Emma, who Wade saw every other weekend when he drove the 5-hour trip across the desert. Since losing his dive partner Marcus in an equipment failure accident in 2018, Wade had become obsessive about following protocols. He triple-checked every gauge, every seal, every backup system. His reputation in the technical diving community was built on 2 things: skill and caution. He did not take unnecessary risks. He did not cut corners, which made what happened at 1,140 feet even more inexplicable. The job had come through a marine archaeology firm called Triton Deep Research. They had contacted Wade on February 28th, offering $15,000 for a 3-day survey of a sonar anomaly detected by commercial shipping routes. The contract seemed legitimate: standard liability waivers, proper insurance documentation, professional letterhead. Wade and his safety diver Gavin Torres had departed from San Diego Harbor at 5:47 that morning on a chartered research vessel. Conditions were ideal: calm seas, 40 feet of visibility near the surface, light currents. Wade was using a closed-circuit rebreather system and trimix gas blend, 10% oxygen and 50% helium, specifically designed for extreme depth diving. He had planned every minute of the descent and ascent, calculated decompression stops down to the second. Gavin would wait at 400 feet as safety backup, while Wade went deeper alone. The descent took 95 minutes. Wade dropped through layers of temperature change, watching his depth gauge climb steadily. At 900 feet, the water temperature hit 37 degrees Fahrenheit. At 1,000 feet, the darkness became absolute except for his helmet lights. At 1,100 feet, his sonar array showed the structure clearly, 20 yards ahead. He checked his gas mix, his pressure gauges, his dive computer, everything nominal. His breathing was steady. His mind was clear. Too clear. At this depth, most divers experienced some level of impairment: slowed thinking, difficulty concentrating, loss of fine motor control. Wade felt none of that. He felt sharp, focused, almost hyper-aware. That should have been his first warning. At 1,140 feet, Wade Mercer's helmet lights illuminated something that rewrote human history in an instant. The skeleton lay curled on its side in the silt, knees drawn up toward the chest, massive arms wrapped around the legs, head tucked down as if sleeping, or perhaps trying to make itself smaller. The skull alone measured 4.3 feet from crown to jaw, with perfect human dentition visible through the mud-caked bone. 32 teeth scaled proportionally to the enormous cranium. The rib cage was intact, each rib as thick as Wade's thigh, arcing upward in a protective cage that would have housed organs the size of refrigerators. The spine showed no signs of disease or deformity, each vertebra perfectly formed and aligned. This was not some prehistoric creature or evolutionary dead end. This was a human being, anatomically flawless, just impossibly large, and it had been bound with chains that looked like they were forged yesterday. Wade activated his helmet camera and began systematic documentation, moving slowly to avoid stirring up sediment. The chains wrapped around the skeleton's wrists and ankles were constructed from iron links 18 inches long and 6 inches thick, each link hand-forged with visible hammer marks and imperfections that spoke of medieval craftsmanship. He pulled out his handheld XRF analyzer, a device that could identify metal composition through non-destructive X-ray fluorescence. The readout showed high carbon content, low manganese, trace amounts of phosphorus and silicon, exactly matching European iron forging techniques from approximately 1200 to 1400 AD. But the chains showed almost no rust, no pitting, no structural degradation. After centuries underwater in salt water, iron corroded completely, turned to orange sludge, and flaked away to nothing. These chains looked like they had been submerged for maybe 5 years, not 500. Wade reached out and gripped one of the chain links with both gloved hands, trying to shift it. His force gauge, designed to measure pulling tension, registered 4,200 pounds of weight. He could not move it even an inch. The chains were not just decorative. They were functional restraints, massive and heavy enough to hold down something with the strength to match its size. Wade's mind raced through the implications. If this skeleton was genuine, if it was really human, then every anthropology textbook ever written was wrong. Homo sapiens had never exceeded 7.5 feet in height in any verified fossil record. Giants were mythology, folklore, stories told around fires to frighten children. But Wade was staring at 47 feet of perfectly preserved human bone structure that said otherwise. Then he noticed the engravings. Along the surface of each chain link, barely visible under layers of mineral deposit, someone had carved markings into the iron. Wade scraped away sediment with his dive knife, revealing lines of text in what looked like Latin characters. Not words, though. Numbers, coordinates, degrees, minutes, seconds in geographic notation that would not be standardized until the 1700s. He photographed every chain link he could access, capturing 12 sets of coordinates in total. His navigation computer had GPS capability even at this depth, and he pulled up the mapping software to plot the locations. 7 coordinates besides this one, scattered across the Pacific Ocean in a pattern that formed almost a perfect circle, each point roughly the same distance from a central location somewhere west of San Francisco. 8 points total, 8 chains, 8 skeletons maybe. 8 giants bound and sunk to the deepest parts of the ocean where no one would ever find them. Wade checked his dive time. 31 minutes at depth. He had planned for 45 maximum before beginning ascent to allow proper decompression time. He used the remaining minutes to examine the skeleton more closely, looking for any clue about cause of death. That was when he saw the burn marks. Along the skull, the ribs, the long bones of the arms and legs, there were areas of blackening and heat fracture that could only come from exposure to extreme temperatures, the kind of temperatures that turned bone to ash. But this skeleton was at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, where the water temperature was 37 degrees and had been for thousands of years. There was no volcanic activity in this area, no hydrothermal vents, no natural source of heat that could explain scorch marks on submerged bones, unless the giant had been burned before being chained and dumped, unless someone had tried to kill it with fire, failed, and decided drowning was more certain. Wade initiated his ascent at 8:34 in the morning, leaving the chained giant behind in the darkness as he rose slowly through the water column, following the decompression schedule programmed into his dive computer. 6 hours and 20 minutes of mandatory stops at decreasing depths, allowing the nitrogen and helium in his bloodstream to off-gas safely before returning to surface pressure. During the long ascent, Wade reviewed the footage on his helmet's heads-up display, watching the recording of his time at depth, looking for anything he might have missed. That was when he noticed something that made him stop breathing for 3 full seconds. In the video, clearly visible when he moved his lights across the skeleton's chest cavity, there were marks on the inside of the ribs. Score marks, deep gouges that could only have been made by something clawing from the inside out. As if whatever had inhabited this body had tried to break free from its own bones before death finally took it. At 300 feet, Wade met up with Gavin Torres at the safety depth platform, a weighted line with clips where divers could rest during decompression. Gavin signaled the question with hand gestures, asking what Wade had found. Wade gave the sign for later, not wanting to explain over the dive communication system, which transmitted through the boat's radio and could be monitored by anyone with the right frequency. They hung in the blue void together, breathing slowly, watching their computers count down the minutes until the next ascent. Gavin mentioned something over the comm system that Wade had not realized during his dive. Between 1,120 feet and 1,140 feet, Wade's radio signal had cut out completely for 14 minutes. The communication system was supposed to transmit continuously through a fiber optic tether cable, with redundant backups through acoustic signaling. There had been no equipment malfunction, no mechanical failure. The signal had simply stopped, then resumed when Wade began his ascent. Gavin said it was like Wade had entered a dead zone where radio waves could not penetrate, except that was impossible because the tether was physical cable, not wireless transmission. Wade surfaced at 2:54 in the afternoon, breaking through into sunlight that seemed impossibly bright after the absolute darkness of deep water. The crew helped him onto the dive platform and removed his helmet, and Wade took his first breath of unfiltered air in over 8 hours. His body ached from the long immersion, his joints stiff from the pressure changes, his mind still processing what he had seen. Gavin surfaced 10 minutes later, and they sat together on the deck while the boat captain prepared to return to San Diego. Wade was about to explain everything when the captain called out from the bridge. A vessel was approaching from the southeast, moving fast. Wade checked his watch. 3:47 in the afternoon. 53 minutes since he had surfaced. The vessel was a NOAA research ship, the Pacific Surveyor, with a crew of 12 visible on deck and scientific equipment that looked more military than civilian. Commander Reeves, a man in his 50s with gray hair and no rank insignia despite his title, came aboard Wade's boat without asking permission and immediately requested all dive equipment, camera footage, GPS data, and biological samples. Wade asked how NOAA had known to come. Reeves did not answer. He simply stated that the discovery constituted an archaeological find requiring federal assessment and that all materials were being confiscated under maritime law. Within 2 hours, Wade's helmet camera was gone, his backup dive computer was gone, his XRF analyzer was gone, and the boat's navigation logs had been copied and erased. Reeves declared the coordinates environmentally sensitive and said no vessels would be permitted within 5 nautical miles of the site, pending further investigation. Then the NOAA ship departed, leaving Wade and Gavin alone on a boat that now felt very small and exposed on the open ocean. Wade tried calling Triton Deep Research, the company that had hired him, using the contact number on his contract. The line was disconnected. He tried their website. Offline, domain not found. He tried the physical address listed on the paperwork, a commercial office building on Harbor Drive in San Diego. When they returned to port at 7:30 that evening, Wade drove straight to the address. The office was vacant, empty windows with "For Lease" signs, no indication anyone had worked there in months. The security guard in the building lobby said the space had been empty since January. Wade checked his bank account that night. The $7,500 deposit from Triton Deep Research, which had cleared 3 days earlier, was gone. Not refunded, not reversed. Simply gone, with no transaction record. The bank claimed it was a database error, that no such deposit had ever been made. But Wade had the confirmation email, the transaction notification, the balance screenshot. He had proof. Except now he had nothing. No footage, no samples, no employer, no money. Just a memory of something impossible chained to the ocean floor, and coordinates carved in iron that pointed to 7 more sites scattered across the Pacific. Wade made a decision. He still had one backup that NOAA had not found. He always recorded dives on a secondary device, a small camera built into his dive knife handle, a habit from his Navy days when redundancy meant survival. The footage quality was lower, the angle was limited, but it was something. And he still remembered the coordinates. Wade spent the next 3 days in the San Diego Public Library, searching through archived maritime records and academic journals for any reference to the 7 coordinates he had photographed. He cross-referenced shipping disappearances, naval incidents, unexplained losses at sea between 1700 and 1900. What he found was a pattern that made his hands shake as he typed. 23 vessels had vanished at those exact coordinates over 2 centuries. Not near them, not in the general area. Exactly at those points, down to the minute of latitude and longitude. Combined, those ships carried 1,847 crew members. None were ever found. No wreckage, no bodies, no debris. The official records listed them as lost to storms or piracy or navigation errors. But 23 ships disappearing at 8 specific points spread across thousands of miles of ocean was not coincidence. It was a pattern. It was intentional. On the 4th day, Wade found something that changed everything. An obscure academic paper published in 1962 by Dr. Miriam Keller, a marine archaeologist from UC San Diego, titled Anomalous Skeletal Remains Recovered from Pacific Fishing Operations, 1890 to 1920. The paper documented 14 separate reports from commercial fishermen who had recovered bone fragments in their nets, fragments that showed human anatomical structure but impossible size ratios, femur sections measuring over 6 feet long, skull fragments with normal human cranial features scaled to 3 times typical dimensions, vertebrae the size of dinner plates. Dr. Keller had attempted to carbon date the samples and conduct comparative anatomy studies, but her research was abruptly defunded in 1963. The paper itself had been declassified by the Navy under environmental concerns, which made no sense for paleontological research. Dr. Keller's university position was terminated shortly after. She was 43 years old at the time, an age when most academics were reaching their peak productivity. The paper ended with a single line that Wade read 5 times to make sure he understood it correctly. Further investigation into the so-called Pacific Sentinels has been deemed inadvisable by federal authorities. Wade found Dr. Miriam Keller living in a retirement community in Eugene, Oregon. She was 86 years old now, living alone in a small apartment filled with books and boxes of old research materials she had refused to destroy. When Wade called and explained what he had found, there was a long silence on the phone. Then she said 4 words. "They are still there." She agreed to meet him the next day. Wade drove the 11 hours north through California and into Oregon, arriving at her apartment complex at 9 in the evening. Dr. Keller opened the door before he could knock, looked at him with eyes that were still sharp despite her age, and said, "You saw one of them. The chains were intact." It was not a question. She knew. She had always known. Dr. Keller led Wade to her dining room table, which was covered with maps and photocopied documents and handwritten notes spanning 60 years of secret research. She told him that during her work in the 1950s and 60s, she had discovered references in Spanish colonial archives to something the missionary priests called Los Centinelas del Abismo, the Sentinels of the Abyss. According to journals kept by Franciscan missionaries traveling with Spanish naval expeditions in the 1500s and 1600s, sailors had reported finding enormous human remains chained in deep water off the California coast. The priests considered it heresy, evidence of pre-Christian giants mentioned in biblical texts but officially denied by church doctrine. The expedition maps showing these locations were confiscated and burned by the Inquisition. But Dr. Keller had found copies in Mexican archives, forgotten documents that had escaped destruction. The coordinates matched, 8 locations forming a perfect circle. She unfolded a large nautical chart across the table, marked with 8 red points. "The circle has a radius of 847 nautical miles," she said, tracing the pattern with her finger. "The center point is here, approximately 1,200 miles west of San Francisco. Estimated depth at that location is 18,400 feet, deeper than anything reachable with 1600 technology, deeper than most modern submarines can safely go." She pulled out a satellite image printout, dated February 2025, showing thermal readings of the ocean surface. At the center coordinate, there was a distinct warm anomaly, water temperature 14 degrees Fahrenheit higher than surrounding areas. No volcanic activity in the region. No geological explanation, just heat rising from the deep. Wade asked the obvious question. If the chains dated to medieval times, how could they be forged in 200 to 400 BC, as his XRF analysis had suggested? Dr. Keller smiled, but there was no humor in it. She told him to send the photos to Professor Devon Chen at MIT, a metallurgical forensics expert she had worked with years ago. Wade did so immediately, emailing from his phone. The response came back in 40 minutes. Professor Chen confirmed that the iron composition matched European medieval forging techniques, specifically 13 to 1400 AD. But carbon dating of organic material trapped in the chain links, microscopic plant matter, and shell fragments embedded in the metal during cooling showed formation between 200 and 400 BC. "That is impossible," Professor Chen wrote. "Medieval forging techniques did not exist in 200 BC. This object should not exist." Wade's phone buzzed with a new email while he sat in Dr. Keller's apartment. Unknown sender. No subject line. The message body contained a single sentence. "They were not prisoners. They were guards. Below that was a link to a declassified Soviet naval document from 1978. Wade opened it. The document described a Soviet submarine expedition in 1977, attempting to map the deepest trenches of the Pacific for potential strategic advantage. The submarine Volkov descended to 12,000 feet at coordinates matching the center point of Dr. Keller's circle. Radio contact was lost. The vessel was recovered 3 weeks later, drifting at 600 feet with all systems operational. Food in the galley was untouched. Equipment was functioning. The submarine's hull showed no damage, but all 76 crew members were gone. No bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just an empty vessel floating in the dark. Wade Mercer's diving certification was revoked in June of 2023, 3 months after his discovery. The reason given was unspecified safety violations during deep technical dive operations. He contested the revocation through the Professional Association of Diving Instructors, providing his complete dive logs, equipment maintenance records, and safety protocols documentation. The appeal has been listed as pending review for 18 months now. No diving certification board returns his calls. No one will explain what violations he supposedly committed. His second backup footage, the knife-handle camera recording that NOAA never found, disappeared from his cloud storage account in July of 2023. Google claimed there was no record of the file ever being uploaded. But Wade had the email confirmation showing successful upload on March 4th at 8:17 in the evening, approximately 1 hour after he returned to his apartment. The file was 3.2 gigabytes. It existed. Then it did not. In October of 2023, a commercial fishing vessel called Emma's Pride, captained by Dutch Harmon, a 40-year veteran of Pacific fishing operations, reported a net snag 68 miles off the Oregon coast. When the crew retrieved their net after 3 hours of careful winching, they found it tangled around a section of chain. Iron chain, 9 feet long, with links 18 inches across and hand-forged hammer marks visible on every surface. Dutch took photographs before the Coast Guard arrived. The guard appeared 4 hours later, confiscated the chain section, and told Dutch it was protected archaeological material that he had illegally removed from federal waters. Dutch had the photos. He posted them online that night. They circulated for 8 hours across social media, shared thousands of times before being systematically removed from every platform: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit. The reason given was copyright violation, which made no sense because Dutch owned the images and had not granted copyright to anyone. The photos showed chains identical to what Wade had documented. Same size, same construction, same impossible preservation. Dutch tried to post them again. His accounts were suspended. In December of 2024, a Navy sonar technician whose name has never been revealed leaked classified data to an investigative journalist. The leaked material included 6 seconds of ROV footage from NOAA's Pacific Surveyor, recorded in April of 2023 when the research vessel returned to Wade's dive coordinates. The footage shows the seafloor at 1,140 feet, the same location where Wade had found the giant skeleton. But the skeleton was gone. The chains remained, lying in the silt exactly where Wade had seen them. Still intact, still showing no corrosion, still massive and heavy and impossibly preserved. But they were no longer binding anything. The chains were open, not broken, not corroded through, not damaged. Open, as if someone had unlocked them from the inside. The ROV footage ends abruptly, as if whoever was operating the camera had shut it off immediately upon seeing what the chains no longer held. In January of 2025, NOAA declared 2,400 square miles of the Pacific Ocean a protected marine sanctuary with no entry restrictions. The official reason given was to protect endangered species and sensitive marine ecosystems. But there are no endangered species in that particular area of the Pacific. No unique coral formations, no critical breeding grounds, no scientific justification for such an enormous closure. Satellite tracking data, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests that took 11 months to process, shows 3 Navy vessels patrolling the perimeter of the restricted zone 24 hours per day since June of 2024. No civilian ships are permitted within 50 nautical miles. Any vessel approaching the boundary is contacted immediately by Coast Guard radio and redirected. The Navy has not explained why 3 destroyers are necessary to protect empty ocean. Wade Mercer lives in Boise, Idaho now. He moved there in August of 2024, leaving behind the ocean that had been his entire adult life. He works at a dive shop called Mountain Waters, teaching beginners how to dive in lakes, helping people get their basic certifications in calm, shallow water, where the deepest point is 60 feet, and the biggest danger is cold temperature. He does not do technical diving anymore. He does not talk about what he found. In December of 2024, a documentary filmmaker convinced him to give a brief interview. Wade sat in front of the camera and said, "I found something we were never supposed to find. Something that has been down there for thousands of years. And whoever put them there, whoever chained them to the ocean floor, they made sure those chains would never break, and those locks would never rust, and those giants would never get free. Until now." The filmmaker asked what Wade thought the giants were guarding. Wade looked directly into the camera and said, "I do not think they were guarding anything. I think they were keeping something locked away, and I think one of them just opened the door." 8 locations form a perfect circle in the Pacific Ocean. 8 giants chained at impossible depths with chains forged using techniques that did not exist when the chains were made. 23 ships disappeared at those coordinates, carrying 1,847 people who were never found. 76 Soviet sailors vanished from a sealed submarine at the center point, where something is producing heat that has no geological source. If they were prisoners, who had the power to chain beings that size? If they were guards, what were they guarding? And if the chains were opened from the inside in 2023, what has been freed?